And now to explore the topic further, we have a fantastic panel for you, Demystifying Public-Philanthropic Partnerships. It will be moderated by our very own board member, Joe Lumarda. Yay, Joe. I have more to say. Joe is Senior Vice President, Investment Counselor at Capital Group Private Client Services, and he is also a trustee of the California Wellness Foundation. He's a legend and a leader in Southern California philanthropy. Yes, don't look tired. I'll leave it to Joe to introduce his panel.
Mary Odell, President of UniHealth Foundation, Elise Buick, as they walk up, almost like a pageant. Elise Buick, President of United Way of Los Angeles, Miguel Santana, Chief Administrative Officer of the City of Los Angeles. So I just want to start off as the facilitator moderator, just before he probably steps off to develop one of his great ideas, just to thank Bob once again for a wonderful and just a moderator, facilitator, allowed to say a couple of things. Just the concept of fearlessness is just something that, and risk-taking in our field, and how we're just so risk-averse. I remember an old friend, mentor, and boss of mine who Jack Shakely, the old president of the California Community Foundation, he would come up with some things, usually early in the morning, and he would just come up, and I would just go, and he'd see that look on my face, and he'd say, Joe, don't worry about it. I've never seen anybody sent to philanthropic prison. I went, hey, that makes a lot of sense. But I think that, and also it's not only a fearlessness, but we're appreciating what's going on right now in philanthropy and public policy. We also have to appreciate all the people who have gone before us, the mention of Mr. Hewlett. And I was thinking about public policy and partnerships before this panel, and I remembered California Community Foundation, my old stomping grounds, is celebrating its 100th year this year. But before that, the year before, the Cleveland Community Foundation was created. And I remembered something about what they did. So I looked on their website, and this is at the turn of the century. By the end of the decade, and that decade was 1914, the teens, a series of sweeping, reform-minded studies the foundations launched were bearing fruit. One laid the groundwork for the creation of the Emerald Necklace of Cleveland Metro Parks. Another shook up corrupt and Dickensian justice system. Another spearheaded sweeping public school reforms and gave support to the radical notion that girls were worthy of equal education. So just thinking about these partnerships and these efforts have been going on for a long time. It's not a new thing. We just have to be courageous enough to pick it up and to form these partnerships. So it's great that we have these wonderful people here, and he's coming. I'm sure he's coming. Has anybody called him?
Yeah, he might be riding his bike over.
Oh, okay. So I was going to start with Mary, but I'm going to start now with Elise. And the context of this, too, is no better way of actually talking about partnerships, but having a couple of them here in front of us. So Elise and Miguel representing their partnership, particularly around homelessness, and Mary and Mitch around healthcare. So we'll talk for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So write down your questions as you're thinking of them. Elise, my first job was with United Way of Orange County in 1983. Oh my God! And I was I raised money for them, and it was the first time that they had their director of government relations. I remember that was just mind-blowing from them, particularly in Orange County. That's not something United Way has done. I mean, it's kind of fairly novel over the past few decades, at least, and particularly for this United Way. So how did that shift happen from being the campaign of corporations to moving over to this kind of broad public policy and advocacy. And how many people do you have on your board again?
Our board is around 50 people.
Around 50. So I imagine that's a negotiation a bit. So how does that work? And just for full disclosure, Miguel, you're on.
One of my bosses.
Okay,
right?
here, so.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. And this is a topic I feel very passionate about and am thrilled to share and answer any questions because it is an evolution to move into this space. And what I would say about United Way, and also want to acknowledge one of our other board members, Lisa Clary-Alley, who's really helped to architect this, is that while United Way in the past had a toe in the policy arena, we really prided ourselves on being neutral, which is not helpful when you're in the policy arena. And so our board, many of you may know, in 2007, we launched a plan called Creating Pathways Out of Poverty and got very clear that we were going to stand for moving people out of poverty. I'm not sure at the time, in full disclosure, our board fully realized the extent of what we were getting into as an organization. But when we set bold goals around that plan, things like ending homelessness, things like ensuring that every child will graduate and 100% high school graduation, those goals became very mobilizing for our board, and they quickly realized that if we're going to get to scale, that we would have to embark in the policy and advocacy arena, and not just to convene, which I appreciate Bob's comments, but to take that leap to start to take positions. And what we've learned along the way is the lesson I think that Bob lifted up from California Forward, it is all about the coalitions that you build together. And I think in a community as fragmented as LA County, it's really an important role that we can play of bringing those unlikely suspects together and making sure it happens. You know, the area we'll talk about the most today is homelessness, and we're very, very thrilled that the City of Los Angeles and the County of Los Angeles have both released plans to end homelessness in the county. So we should give them a round of applause. But I think, as you'll hear from Miguel, I would say those plans have really been 10 years in the making. And we launched Home for Good in 2010. So you can see it's been a long journey of how we've gotten here. And I would say as you look at this concretely into moving to this arena, there's a couple things that we've learned along the way. One is you really have to be in it for the long haul, especially as you look at big systemic issues. They take time. The players change. When we started this journey, Mayor Villaraigosa was the mayor. The lead supervisor was Zev Yaroslavsky, so the players change along the way. You really have to be building relationships at all levels. I think that was something that we learned, that to really be able to make decisions together, to find innovation, to start to thread the funding together, it really takes a lot of trust. And that has to happen at the staff levels of the institutions in terms of government and philanthropy to really make sure that happens. So it has been a great journey. And you know, I think the other thing is that really looking at how we in philanthropy can not only set a bold goal, but can also hold the public sector accountable to ensuring that those goals get met.
I have a question for you along those lines, but any reflections on being a board member during this process?
Well, you know, both as a board member, but you know, when Elise and I first started working on this issue, I was actually at the county, and I was deputy CEO, and I oversaw social services, including homelessness. And I remember meeting in your office and talking about how do we get the city and the county to work together? What are the challenges with that? And being somewhat honest about the political barriers that get in the way, all self-imposed. And it's been great to see. Well, it took a while to get there, but certainly a lot of progress has been made. But it really even started even before that, because I was in the county when the United Way launched its historic and very important publication, The Tale of Two Cities. I think a lot of you remember that, which really brought to the forefront this notion that there are really two Los Angeles. And I remember it was soon after the implementation of welfare reform, and the county was actually for the first time reaping benefits, financial benefits of welfare reform, because people were being taken out of welfare due to term limits. And so there was a discussion about what do you do with this surplus of dollars, and there was adjustments in how the federal government allocated funds. They gave counties the flexibility to decide how to spend those funds. And it was frankly that report that informed how the Board of Supervisors approached poverty on a countywide basis. And it talked about the working poor, and that there's so many people that work for a living, 1, 2, or 3 jobs, and still have a hard time making ends meet. And of course, it'll be frightening to see what an updated version of that report will look like today. But it was, on the issue of homelessness, it certainly was an opportunity to bring, come on in, Dr. Katz, to bring the city and the county together in a very genuine way, which is on the development of the actual strategies. We often think that because if the principals come together and have a press conference and say they're all working together, that suddenly it's true. And there was that too. It was, actually the Secretary of HUD came out and brought the city and the county together. It's almost like a parent to say, okay, I'm being told you're working together, I actually want to see it in reality, and everyone played nice and said the right things. But it set a standard and expectation, and an expectation that at the end of this process, there was going to be, in fact, a joint strategy. And to be candid, I think none of that would have happened without the United Way. I mean, the United Way ensured that the issue of homelessness stayed in our minds even when Steve Lopez wasn't writing about it. And it was a period of time, having now been around for a while, to have seen the cycle of homelessness where it in some ways it does correlate with Steve Lopez's columns. There are periods in which nobody's talking about it. Everyone privately complains about it or feels frustrated, but there really isn't a genuine effort. And it was during those times that we needed the leadership of the United Way, not only to sort of hold the system accountable to an outcome, but to develop the tools and the language and the framework around it. The coordinated entry system, for example, they nurtured and developed through the Funders Collaborative. This idea that you can, in fact, have a pathway towards eliminating homelessness and not giving up hope in that regard. And all of the funders that are in this room that played such an essential role to that. And then working with government in our respective arenas to make sure that we develop a strategy that was honest about what it can and can't do, but also clear as to our respective roles and responsibilities, which frankly sounds very fundamental, but was really what had been missing for so long.
Great, thank you. So we have our other partnership fully formed now here. So
I feel like I might have left Mary on the altar briefly.
But I forgive you.
But I
Wow.
came.
Yes, you did.
reconciliation, it's a beautiful thing. So Mary, in our prep call, which all good panels hopefully have a prep call. You emphasized that it's not only about systems, and it's about people, and it's about if you don't get along with the person across the table from you, it's the partnership's probably not, or it's going to be more difficult. And I'm thinking of something I saw on the TV recently when Mike Nichols, the late great director Mike Nichols, said, There are only 3 scenes in drama: a seduction, a negotiation, and a fight. So, in that context, no, I'm just kidding. So tell me how the partnership and the people part between your foundation and the county and other systems got together.
So, so my days of public-private partnerships date back to my days at the Reardon Foundation. And I think we really do have to credit Dick Reardon with really professionalizing the idea of public-private partnerships and saying, look, we can use philanthropic dollars to leverage public dollars in an appropriate way. And what he taught me in those days was you have to understand what each sector can and can't do. You have to be willing to sit at the table together. You have to value respectful disagreement. And you have to be willing to compromise. So I remember when Mitch came to the county, I think you started work on January 2nd. And on January 4th, he was in my office telling me how hard it was to get over the Grapevine when it was closed. Do you remember?
Right, I do.
So he's moving his
14
family.
hours.
Yeah, 14 hours he'd driven because the Grapevine was closed and he had to go through the high desert. But the reason he was in my office wasn't to ask me for money. His question to me that day was, here I am in Los Angeles. I'm a public servant. Who should I be talking to? Who should I go out? Who in the communities I serve? The philanthropic sector, yes, but not just the philanthropic sector. The communities I serve should I be talking to? And I gave him a list of 40 people. A lot of you in this room, but people like Sweet Alice, a lot of community-based people. And he set out about calling up these people and saying, how can I serve you? That, I think, was the foundation of our partnership, where we were able to start a conversation that identified a shared mission. And we were able to sit down at a table with each other and say, here's what I can do, and here's what you can do, and how can we do it together? So I think that in the arena of public-private partnerships, you have to be at the table together at the beginning. You have to be able to kind of put aside your personal prejudices and work hard at understanding what your partner can and can't do. Like Elise said, you have to be willing to be in it together for the long haul. These things don't happen quickly. And you have to have some tolerance for risk. I can guarantee you something's going to happen that you have no control over that is going to upend your project some way. Sequestration's going to happen, and all the supportive housing vouchers are going to be held up, and darn it, that's going to just make it hard for your project to go forward. So, I would say I enjoy working with the public sector. I've learned so much about how government works by being inside in a way that's very privileged.
I'm always astounded by this number. What's your budget again?
My budget's about $7.5 billion a year.
A year.
And mine's nowhere close.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
The point is the collective payouts of all of our organizations don't come close to one county's health, one part of the county, a major part, health budget. So in that conversation, I would categorize that kind of as a seduction. Right. During that time, you were getting to know each other. Right. You're saying, how can we work together? So to get to negotiation, right. How have you seen it work successfully? You've used the words, proof of concept when you have a thought. what has worked well for you in that regard?
Well, Mary and many of the other people in this room have been amazing partners in transforming the county system. And I really don't think that the county system would be anywhere near as improved as it is today. It's not where it needs to be, but it's a lot further than it was 5 years ago, and it's because of Mary's efforts and a lot of the people in this room who helped. As you explained, I mean, the seduction, and I don't think that's necessarily such a bad word, is that I run this large machinery, right? It's not only a budget, but it's 35,000 employees and a large number of contractors and a tremendous ability to do good. But sometimes I can't do some tiny, tiny little thing because I have some rule. And that's when I'll go to Mary and say, Mary, if you could, I have all of the funding, and this is true, to do the largest program in the United States providing primary care to undocumented people, which we're currently enrolled 135,000 people. That's aside from those people who are receiving services in the county. It's all through the federally qualified health centers, which is another kind of leverage and another build through the infrastructure. But I needed an enrollment system, and Mary paid for that. So I had the dollars to do the services, but I didn't have the dollars to do the system, and often it helps me when philanthropy will do something like that for me, not only because of the dollars. Sometimes what I don't have is the 9 months of the procurement, right? That it would take me 9 months to procure the system, and by that time, the opportunity would be missed. Mary has also paid for things like one of our quality improvement efforts at Harbor Hospital has been to use lean. Now, it's, I think, actually been a relatively small investment on Mary's part relative to the budget of Harbor, and you might look at it and say, well, come on, Mitch, you're running the $7.5 billion organization, what would $75,000 to do a lean project mean to you? Why can't you just find that in your budget? And the answer is, well, that would be a procurement issue. I'd have to go out and procure that thing. Second, even if it's $75,000, it would have to come from somewhere, which would mean that I'd have to stop doing something, which is not a very good way to begin a project like lean. Right, by saying we're going to stop this, right? Because I'm always trying to promote that the number one goal is service, right? That's what we do. We're a service department. We take care of people. If I have to start by saying, and now I want to fund a enrollment system, or I want to fund coaches to help my employees do better, then it's like, well, that's not directly service. And I thought, Mitch, you're really focused on service. So when someone like Mary can say, okay, well, if I give him $75,000 to make the machinery of Harbor run much more effectively, then that's a very leveraged investment. And I think I'm not sure, Mary, we've ever had a match one, but I saw Bill here, which always reminds me that one of the ways that we have done our housing stuff is that Bill Pittman from the Hilton Foundation gave a rather large matching grant, which really challenged the government to say, okay, well, how much do we believe in housing? And it turned out the answer was $5 million if someone else were prepared to put up $5 million to be matched. So I think that's yet another way that sometimes philanthropy can make something happen. And it turns out in that gift, it's not just the match that then was the $5 million, but that people have seen that, well, actually, we could bring housing to scale, right? No one questions whether or not you can do supportive housing. No one questions whether you can do it in Los Angeles. It's been done in Los Angeles. There have been a number of programs over the last 15 or 20 years. The question is, and I know very much, Miguel, the work of the city and the county, can we do it on scale, right? Not can we create a great program for 60 homeless people to house them. That's a good deed. But can we really house 20,000 people, right? I mean, that's the goal, and it's not only the match, but then it is, as you say, the proof of concept that led to then people saying, okay, look, turns out that for an affordable amount of money, the county actually, through its health programs, can provide housing to all of these people.
One thing you said, Miguel, that was very interesting, and accountability. So as institutions, whether nonprofit, I think we're all, in terms of broad theory, we're all accountable to the citizens of the state of California. You're accountable to your board, and to our people. So the question is, and going from seduction, negotiation to fight, 50 people on your board that you had to get around. I know you have a few pretty strong-willed business folks who have an opinion probably about how government works.
Yes, they do.
And so, why don't you talk about how you, and we don't want to hear how it all was rosy, and so what was the fight? What was the moment where you said, I'm not sure if I can do this? Because we're not getting anywhere.
So that speaks to your tolerance for risk, right? So let me give you an example of the Star Apartments. So Bill's, the Hilton Foundation saying to the county, okay, we've got this money, we're going to do a match. Mitch called me up and said, look, this is what I need. I need money to build out the clinical space on the first floor of the Star Apartments. And I went, oh man, now I gotta go. So I said, I've gotta work this a little bit with my board members that might be saying to me, why the heck would we be giving the county money to build out a clinical space? So what we did was we invited the chairman of my board and one other board member who I knew was going to be a hard sell. And this was while the Star was being built. We found a place in a building across the street, and we all met there, and Mitch came, and Mark Golly was there, and we took a look at this place. And we talked about how county health care dollars were going to be used to house people, because what these people needed was a house. They didn't need to be housed in a hospital. So we started it that way, and got the support of what I consider to be key board members who, when we took this proposal to the board, which was $500,000 for a pure capital grant that we normally don't make, but is what they needed to get this program going, it went fine. Lean is another good example. We had a physician on our board with a lot of experience at Harbor who called me up when he saw that proposal and said, I don't know about this, Mary. I think this, and this. And I said, instead of saying, well, you're wrong, I said, how can I make you feel better about this? Can I take you there? And so we called up the CEO and we said, we really need to bring our physician there, and he needs to see what you're doing and get comfortable with your leadership. That was his issue. Not so much lean, because people have all kinds of opinions about lean. It was leadership that was his issue. And so that's what we did. Again, we hauled them over there. They met the leadership. We watched a lean stand up, and it made all the difference in the world. So I would say to you, you have to have some tolerance for risk, and you have to think kind of ways you can engage your board at the front end before you go to a board meeting and you have a big argument. So my job, I always think, is to figure out all the questions they're going to ask and work on those in advance. And a perfect project is when nobody asks me a question at the board meeting.
I think with our board, we've found there are multiple approaches. So one is making sure we have experts on our board who can really speak to the issue. The board has a lot of trust in folks like Miguel, John Mack, Stuart Quo, who can really talk about these issues on the ground. I think the second thing is the goal becomes a rallying point. If we really do want to end homelessness, then it makes it a natural in terms of what actions we're going to take. But you have to show them it's possible. Many of you know Home for Good is a partnership with the LA Chamber. So for our board, we actually took them to Denver to show them that Denver had reduced their homeless population and let them learn for themselves, let them experience it, let them ask questions. I think experiential learning is really critical. The emotion, some people are moved emotionally. They go to the Star Apartments and see what's possible. For some people, it's very logical. So early on, there is a cost study that was done by USC that showed that it was 40% cheaper to house people than to leave them on the streets. Well, our board couldn't get their head around that at first. It's cheaper for us to house people. So there's a logic in that. We spoke to business leaders who really like to cut costs. So there's a variety of ways, but I do think you have to be very intentional about how the board really is understanding the innovation that you're trying to scale, and that to get to scale, it does require working with the public sector. And you know, we've weighed in on different issues from Prop H. I remember for that one, we actually had the mayor of Pasadena come and tell our board that mixed income housing doesn't kill a community. So you really have to figure out what spokespeople can help deliver that message that the board's really going to pay attention to and make them feel comfortable to take action. And I think for our board, probably one of the toughest debates we had that I remember is when we were asked to weigh in on Prop 30. You know, my board is largely business leaders. We have Bank of America, other great supporters who get nervous a little bit about weighing in on things like tax or revenue initiatives. And I know we're going to be asked to weigh in on one for homelessness. But they went around the room and said, if we really care about all kids graduating high school, if we really care about all people having housing, I have to take off my individual hat and put on my United Way hat and vote for what's best for the organization. And to me, that's the biggest shift the board has made, is that they're really making collective decisions. I think having really good staff work is really important for the board, and I really want to thank the Hilton Foundation. We would not be where we've been if they had not taken a big risk on us years ago to set up Home for Good. They took a lot of heat from their board about that investment, and you really do have to invest in the staffing. We have an amazing Home for Good team with Christine Margiotta and Chris Coe, but they've been at it now for 10 years building relationships, and they're on the ground, and our board now trusts that when we take an action that it's been very well vetted.
Can I have do we have a Hilton Foundation person who's
Bill is here.
You've been mentioned a couple of times already. I'm going to do this, you know. Can we get a mic over there and ask, you know, what? So talk about that. You've been mentioned twice up here, two different issues. So what's kind of the process, what went on at your foundation to take what would be considered significant risks?
Well, thanks, Mitch and Elise, for embarrassing me. Bill Pipkin with the Connor Hilton Foundation. Great partners, and Mary and Miguel, all of you. I think, you know, for our board, it's been working on some of these issues for a long time. About in a board retreat about, I guess 7 years ago, really wanted to go in a more strategic way on some specific issues and realized, you know, we can fund good programs, and we've been doing that for many years, but we want to be solving problems. So I think over time, got more comfortable and had been working with the public sector and government, but in a more intentional way. And so I think it was, what really helped was when we were able to say, we're not going to be doing it alone, right? We're going to be partnering with our philanthropic partners, and so with United Way, but UniHealth, Weingart, many of the foundations here, we work together on addressing these issues. Philanthropy coming together with a voice, with our funds, which can be helpful and important, as we've heard some examples. So that really helped the board understand, you know, we're in this together. It's not just us, and philanthropy working together can help then catalyze and take things to scale, as we've talked about.
Without attribution, what was the toughest question you got from a board member on this regard?
Why wouldn't we just do it ourselves, right? Why do we need to work in this collaborative way? So again, it was a positive thing, but well, we know we've got good staff, we've got great partners. Why not just work with them? Why do we need to go through an intermediary or create a funders collaborative? Why not just do it ourselves?
So that's an interesting segue to another question, which is often, depending on administrations, government says the same thing. They said, why do we need to work with them? Why don't we just do it ourselves? Also, we have to like share credit and stuff. You know, we don't like doing that. And that gets to like the culture of your institutions. And in many ways, beyond the politicians who tend to come and go, you guys endure. So tell me about kind of the culture of managing through these changes and keeping your eye on that long-term ball of what you see for a better community.
Well, in many ways, that's our default setting is, you know, we could do it, you know, and we could do everything. And that's our biggest challenge is often ourselves, because we only know what we know in our universe, and the challenging part is thinking beyond that and being honest that there's certain things that we're frankly not good at, and accepting that, and then figuring out if we're not good at this, or it's not in our purview to do this, then who can we partner with to still ensure that that outcome is achieved, you know? In a different context, I see Kathy here, who we worked on at the Discovery Cube in the San Fernando Valley. It was a good example of an idea that the city could run a children's museum, and it turned out to be a disaster, and we had to go out and partner with a nonprofit provider to provide this quality facility in the largest cultural facility in the San Fernando Valley, over 250 visitors in 1 year. But in the area of homelessness, it was particularly tough because homelessness is a place where it's frankly homeless in government. You know, there isn't a department of homelessness in the city of Los Angeles or in the county, and we each encounter the homeless population in different ways, and we don't aggregate those ways. Part of what got the city to finally acknowledge that it was really in our best interest to do something in collaboration is that when we issued a study in my office that showed that whether we want to address it or not, we're spending well over $100 million a year just managing a problem with no end game. That's just basically pushing people around from one neighborhood to another, and that was a very conservative number. And it simply answered the question, how much does it cost us today? And not necessarily associated to housing or to healthcare or to any kind of service. And so we could continue doing that, and that number will continue to grow if we choose to sort of handle this issue in the way we are now, or not handling it. Or we could be honest about what our responsibility is and then figure out how we clarify our roles with the county and then with philanthropy. And that's really what I think brought the mayor and the council to understand that it really needed to be a comprehensive strategy, one that would be very incomplete if it only talked about the city's responsibilities. It had to be in partnership with everyone else.
Mitch, any comment on piercing the corporate culture or of government?
Well, I think part of whether it's self-selection or not, government people tend to be sort of controlling. And I find that really unhelpful. You know, I think that great things happen when people let go, when people focus on, you know, what is it we're trying to achieve, rather than, you know, I have to control this, I have to control that. Just in general, when I think about the conversation we're having, and I listen to Miguel, one of my thoughts is, especially with regard to the question of boards, my concern is not that philanthropy boards will be discouraged by smart business people. My concern is that that homelessness would probably be better solved from a business point of view. And that part of our failure to solve the problem of homelessness, which is from my point of view, I'm a clinical doctor, I all the time deal with problems that can't be solved, right? Metastatic cancer, end-stage renal disease, congestive heart failure. Homelessness is an entirely curable problem. I house someone, they cease to be homeless, I'm done. There isn't another chronic problem that I can do that with. And yet I think the overall response, as Miguel explains, is so we're dealing with this as a public service, social service problem, with the result that we spend hundreds of millions of dollars for the homeless doing everything other than housing them. And I think, right, the big switch over the last few years is recognizing that if you want to end homelessness, you have to house people. That's the end game. That's the only useful part. But I mean, but you realize that and Miguel and I can, as two open civil servants, can admit it, that most of our government money on the homeless today is not spent housing them. We're still not, I mean, we're so much better than we were. And I think the new joint plans will take us even further. But among some of the discussions on that joint plan, I know I've been in there and Miguel has been in there saying, no, more of the money has to go to house people. And so, I think that there is tremendous gain from, bringing in philanthropy and business closer and not holding them afar.
And just to add to that too, I think a role we can play, it's not just enough to be convening the institutions, but we also see our role as the public service face of the issue, keeping the issue alive in the media. Many of you know we do a home walk every year, 15,000 people. Well, we do that because we want to keep getting critical mass at the neighborhood level to really start to lobby our electeds around this issue. And what's tricky on this is that the cities provide the housing, the county provides the services, but trying to site housing in neighborhoods throughout the county is problematic. So I think we also have to look at what we're doing on the ground in neighborhoods to be creating the public will to join us in holding our electeds accountable on this issue.
Well, and I think we can't understate the role of leadership. For a public-private partnership to work, there has to be credible leadership at the private sector and credible leadership at the public sector and credible leadership in the philanthropic sector. When Mitch talks about, well, the way you cure homelessness is you house people, public agencies are bureaucracies. Bureaucracies, by and large, do not reward innovation. It took some risk for him to stand up and say to his bosses, look, I want to use health care dollars for housing. I want to cut across our silos. I mean, one of the things that I learned when I started doing public-private partnerships is people that work in this silo don't have any clue who the people working in this silo are, and they never talk to each other. But they're serving the same constituency, just in different ways. He's serving them as a medical doctor, and his law enforcement folks are serving them in a completely different capacity. So for somebody to stand up who is in a bureaucracy that doesn't reward innovation and say, wait, I have a better idea, let's use healthcare dollars to house people, that's leadership. And that's leadership that those leaders in other sectors can acknowledge and support. And so I think if you're thinking about public-private partnerships at the get-go, you need to identify that leadership, leaders that are willing to stand up, like many of your board members have done, like you have done, Miguel, and say, we think it's worth this risk to do something different and maybe risk failing, and that's okay.
So I'm sure many of you want to take a risk and have that great question that you've been burning with you, so why don't we open it up to questions? Tell us
Hi,
who
I'm
you are.
Angie G. Marie with the Goldrush Foundation. So this panel has talked a lot about risk, and I feel like I would love to know how you guys are defining that. I think there are hard choices that take convincing, and then there are things that, other decisions that could possibly lead to failure, and the realities of the outcomes are unknown. So I think those are sort of two different ways to approach risk, and I'd love to know more about your thoughts on that.
I'll start. I mean, in the area of homelessness, I think the biggest risk is when you say you could end it. Because, you know, we worked with the county and the United Way and others to put together this 10-year plan with the goal of ending homelessness in the context of that 10 years. And then the biggest risk is on year 11, and there's still homeless people. And the reality is there probably will be, you know. And so the risk is, do you choose not to do anything because you can't guarantee that at the end of the 10 years you're going to end a problem? Or do you work towards it? And I think that's something that political bodies have to answer, that boards on foundations have to answer. Is it worth taking that risk, even though intuitively you know that you're setting a goal that you're likely to fail? And I think the biggest shift that has occurred is that there's an alignment where, you know, the decision makers are saying, yes, it is worth taking that risk. Some of them won't be here in 10 years, so it's easier to do that. But I think the real question is the status quo acceptable? And if you maintain the status quo, what happens? What's the risk of doing nothing? And I think and so that really balances the other risk.
Any other comments on risk?
Well, I think, you know, I don't know about you, but at our foundation, it probably isn't a good strategy to propose a grant and then say, oh, and it might not work, right? So most of us take kind of safe bets to our board. We like to go back after 2 or 3 years and say, oh, goody, this worked, and this is what happened, right? When you're doing something that's more innovative, you have to be willing to say to your board, this might not work. This could go sideways on us. We're going to do everything we can to mitigate that, but it might not work. When Mitch talked about One App and saying, I need that money, that was like woohoo for me, because 10 years ago, we'd entered into this big project with the county where we tried to do One App for enrollment into Medi-Cal. And we worked on it for about 4 years. We had philanthropic partners at the table. We collectively put about $5 million philanthropic dollars into it. And then the county CEO at the time said, oh, well, I changed my mind. I don't want to do this.
It wasn't Miguel.
No, it wasn't Miguel.
I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that.
But that was the risk. And we all knew it going in. When I got this call about Healthy Way or My Health LA, I thought, here, I have this binder, and I delivered it and said, you go, guy. You know, this was a good thing. But I think taking risk is being truthful, is saying, look, this might not work, but I think it's a prudent use of philanthropic dollars because it might work, and the payoff might be big.
I'm going to use the risk to put in a plug, not for money, but for risk takers. I think the big challenge that the county and the city face that we could make a huge difference on is the justice population in Los Angeles. And there is now the political will, the Board of Supervisors, the DA, the public defender, the sheriff. And if ever you want to talk about sort of high stakes gains and risks, it's got to be the county jail. 26,000 people in county jail. Cost is $150,000 per person for a year in the jail. That does not include mental health or substance abuse treatment costs. A third of the people have mental illness so severe that they are taking antipsychotic medications. It blows away all ethnic diversity disparities that we like to talk about, you know, how There are disparities in breast cancer. There are disparities in kidney disease. You go through the jail and everybody's black and brown. It's the most extraordinary injustice, and it's fixable. And there is currently a will to fix it, but it's very high risk, right? The high risk is that among other things, that we could divert somebody into a mental health program, right? And then they might do something, they might commit another crime, which of course happens in the normal course of events anyway. The recidivism rate in the county jail, if you have a serious mental illness, is that 75% of those people wind up back in the jail within 6 months. So that crimes will occur, but obviously justice gets to say, well, your sentence was over, there was nothing we could do about it. Very different if we all join hands and say that the way to be a safer community is to treat people for their mental illnesses, to treat them for their addictions, and that will make us safer, and we recognize that certain crimes may occur, right, because that's the nature of what we're talking about. But I mean, I think that it ties in very well to the homelessness. It's not a separate issue, it's an interlocking issue, because when the mentally ill leave the jail, of course, what are they going to do? Right? They're homeless, right? They're going back onto the streets. So I see that as the very high risk, but also high gain opportunity that's before us.
I saw a question over here.
Sean Landris. As Mitch certainly knows, and as many people know, the county has a 30-year-old productivity investment board, which has been a source of risk capital for many years. And the city of Los Angeles has an innovation fund. For those of us who are on all sides of those tables, what does philanthropy need to know about and adopt about how government does pilots? And what does government need to know about and adopt about how philanthropy does pilots in the service of ultimately scaling solutions?
That's a good question. I think that the thing that philanthropy does better than we do is that it evaluates more aggressively than we do. It's a discussion point at the beginning, and in the middle and at the end, and because your investment is being supported by a board that's asking those questions. And it inherently is about testing concepts and ideas, and you want to evaluate whether they work or not. And it's almost, in most cases, understood that it's not forever, right? In government, a program is established in 1978. It was led by usually someone externally and championed by someone internally. It starts off as an office and becomes a department. It grows to become a bigger department, and then 30 years later, no one asks the question, what problem were we trying to solve again? And the core of it gets lost in all the bureaucracy and in the constituencies that support, and oftentimes get lost in the funding streams that we receive, right? So there was another grant in 1987 that funded this piece of it. And so it doesn't quite tie in what we were doing, but let's go after that grant from the federal government, and we got it. And so we're going to continue on because it was a great idea in 1987. And then in 1993, there was another great idea. And so it evolves that way. And so we certainly have a lot to learn about that part. In the other way around, I think the biggest value that we do have is that once as hard as it is for government to change gears, once we do that, then the impact is massive because of the scale. And innovation that sometimes generated from the elected officials, sometimes it comes from the ground up, sometimes it comes from leaders like Dr. Katz, then it has ways of transforming millions of lives in a very short period of time, if it really takes hold and it changes the way the mainstream programs are developed. And that is something that I think philanthropy is the most effective in impacting government when you're not looking to solve one problem, but you're trying to change the way we do business in aggregate, and really are challenging us to explore it in this context for the purposes of going after the whole.
On behalf of SCG and the community at large, thank you for taking the risk to be here today and for all the work that you do on behalf of